Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news. Eskom has issued a tender to find a partner to support it in setting up a new renewable energy business. Terence Creamer joins me to discuss the development and the strategy behind it. Hi, Terence.
Hi, Chanel.
What sort of partner is Eskom looking for as it moves to set up this new renewables unit?
So I think it's looking for an entity that has experience, particularly in the South African market. We've had, since 2011, we've had a number of renewable energy projects. Over 7 gigawatts, I think, have been procured. More recently, private entities are doing it, but it was under a public procurement program, and there's quite a lot of experience that's been developed, and they're looking at someone who's going to who's had a track record, and it's going to be able to advise them in setting up this standalone business, which they're wanting to pursue a project pipeline of about 2 gigawatts.
What are the strategic objectives behind this strategy?
I'd say there's a two-pronged strategy here. The one is to have a life for its generation business. We know that Eskom is in the process of unbundling, and we've already seen the National Transmission Company South Africa established. There's going to be a distribution entity established, and then there'll be the generation business. So for this generation business, it's very, very coal dominant. It does have Kuberg, the nuclear plant. It does have pumped hydro schemes, but it's very much a coal business. And when South Africa pursued its renewables program, Eskom wasn't allowed to bid. I mean, it was the incumbent. It was also the grid and market operator and system operator, so felt it would be unfair to let this dominant entity, in those days, probably with some balance sheet wherewithal, although they did have major projects underway of their own that were going wrong, but they weren't enabled by government to bid. That sort of philosophy has changed. There's been an entry of a number of renewable companies into the system. We've also seen a tender out for gas to power, where there'll be IPPs. We've got Eskom also pursuing its own gas business. But in the renewables space, Eskom wants to be a participant. They seem to now have shareholder, which is government, support for that, and board mandate to pursue the standalone business. And so for the generation business to have some life as their coal plants decommission. And the cheapest electricity now is produced, new electricity is produced using solar and wind. So that's going to be part of the South African, a bigger part of the South African electricity mix going into the future. And Eskom feels they need to be part of that. So it's to give some sort of life beyond coal for the generation business. And the second is very much a just energy transition motivation. So they're saying, we've got 42,000 workers, mostly linked to the coal business, that those workers and those communities in coal regions need to have livelihoods. So that would be the second prong to the strategy. So first, to give the generation business some sort of life beyond coal, and then to also give workers and communities some life beyond coal.
How will the strategy be implemented? It's
clear that, firstly, they're going to have this consultation or this advice that they're seeking. They've had a tender. It's quite an unorthodox way of doing it, but it's a fairly transparent way of doing it. And I think under South Africa's rules of transparent procurement, I think it's important they went that way. But so they're going to then have this advisor with some credentials and with a track record in the market. Then they're going to look at that pipeline, which I spoke about earlier, of 2 gigawatts. Now, what they're saying, it's going to be on their Eskom land, and it's going to be potentially around the existing coal assets. So very much an Mpumalanga focus. So that's linked to the just energy transition. The two virtues there is that you can start pivoting your workers into these renewables plants as you ramp down maybe units that are planned for decommissioning. And then the other virtue is you've got land that is close to grid access, which we know has become extremely scarce. So that seems to be the strategy. They have a pipeline, near a power station pipeline, as they decommission coal plants, they will start ramping up these solar, potentially some wind plants, potentially some battery, I suppose, as well, and around those assets to pivot their workforce into this new opportunity.
Are there any possible risks with the strategy?
Yes, I think that there is still concern that you have such a dominant incumbent that is still more or less vertically integrated. We are seeing the separation happening, and where the key role at the moment should be for that incumbent to be opening up the grid space, really investing heavily in the wise businesses. And there is a lot of action happening on that front, but very slowly, and the backlog is huge. So the cheapest renewable electrons are going to come from regions where the grid isn't at the moment. So the Northern Cape, Western Cape, Eastern Cape. And that needs to be a major focus. So if this is used as a fig leaf to say, we're hiding behind it, we're doing all the right environmental things, don't worry that the grid's taking a bit longer, we are building our own renewables. These renewables are in regions that are not the most potent for renewable electricity production, because the sun and the wind resource is just not as good in the Mpumalanga region. So it will be more expensive for consumers. But if it's aligned, as I say, to the closing it's aligned to closing of coal units and it's pure replacement capacity, I think that would be accepted, and I think it's a sound strategy. I think the other thing is there's going to be a lot of attention paid to their decommissioning plans, because if it's seen as a way to slow those decommissioning plans, I think it's going to raise a lot of eyebrows. Already we've seen that they're operating well outside minimum emission standards, and they've got exemptions to do that for older plants up to 2030. Now there's a whole lot of other plants that are supposed to be decommissioned by 2034, and there's a lot of uncertainty about whether Eskom really is planning to decommission those plants. So there's going to be a lot of focus on that and attention. Are they using now their renewables come coal strategy not just to crowd out private sector, but also to delay what needs to be happening and really unlock what needs to be happening on the other side with private IPP investment, especially in the Cape regions. So yes, there are risks, and I think the fact that they're doing it openly and they're giving us all forewarning, I think that everyone will be aware of those risks, because there's no clarity that Eskom can do this any cheaper than an IPP. It's an insolvent company that's backed by the taxpayer, and therefore it doesn't get its debt any cheaper. It hasn't done very well historically in building new projects. All its projects that were built during the last 10 years and a bit have been behind schedule, massively over budget, prone to corruption. So it doesn't have a great record in building generation assets. So we do have to pay attention, look at the strategy very closely, and make sure that it isn't used as a way of either delaying or of obfuscating or just distracting from what really still needs to be done. And what really needs still to be done is the aggressive restructuring of Eskom, the unbundling of Eskom, the much more access to grid around the country, much more aggressive building of grid, and a diversification of the generation assets around the country, particularly to produce what will be the future workhorse of the electricity system, which is the variable renewable energy projects. They're the cheapest. Coal used to be. They are the cheapest. And then backing that up with flexible generators.
Thank you. That's the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis. Also, don't forget to listen to the audio version of our Engineering News daily email newsletter.